This podcast is brought to you by Renewal by Andersen of Central Pennsylvania. Spend less to heat and cool your home now through March 31st with the area's top full-service window service by saving $300 on every window and $800 on every door. You can even get a free upgrade to Smart Sun Glass without having to pay anything for 2 years. Take advantage of this deal and schedule yourself a free inspection by heading over to rbacentralpadeals.com. That's rbacentralpadeals.com or by calling 717-836-1080.
Under the cover of night, even sedate Central PA suburbia can seem sinister, especially when a possible child predator is lurking. This is what brings Musa Harris, a self-appointed pedophile hunter, to this quiet, well-manicured subdivision on the outskirts of Carlisle. It's nearing 9 p.m. on a Saturday evening. Harris, known as the Luzerne County Predator Catcher on his ubiquitous and popular social media channels, has spent the better part of an hour chatting with his target on a popular app for gay hookups. It's known as Grindr. On the app, Musa has been posing as a 15-year-old boy. This is his digital decoy designed to draw out pedophiles looking for underage sex. In reality, Musa is a bearded but young-looking 43-year-old, and he just might be the most unlikely and unconventional crime fighter one could ever meet.
Thank you for joining us for a special Today in PA episode featuring PennLive crime reporter John Luciew, who's here to talk about his new series on PennLive about the Luzerne County Predator Hunter, Musa Harris. John, thank you for taking the time for being here today. How did you first hear about Musa? What put him on the radar for you?
Basically, he was on the radar because I was following a lot of statewide news for the daily buzz for PennLive, when I would be going out and aggregating a lot of news from all around the state. And I started hearing about this citizen predator hunter up in Luzerne County, and he was reeling in some pretty big catches that he alleges and that were later charged as child predators. You know, that they were meeting up to have sex with a child, but it was Musa Harris instead that they met up with, and he had duped them on these adult dating apps where he would pose as a young, his lingo is younger looking for older, a young person looking for older. And then during the course of the chat, which is, you know, very graphically sexual, he would say, well, I'm only 15 if you don't mind age. And that was the pivot point, whether the person was basically just online looking for a hookup or actually a predator. And he said 98% of the people, once he dropped that bombshell that he was only 15, would say, hey, you don't belong on this app. This is an adult app. You need to be 18 or up to be on here. You know, go away. But there was a small percentage of the people who would take it further and literally want to meet up with a 15-year-old for sex. Some of them even ordering up Ubers, because if you're 15, you can't drive in Pennsylvania normally, to bring Musa, the 15-year-old Musa, his digital decoy to their homes. But yeah, he'd be showing up at these predators' front doors, you know, but when he shows up, he's a 43-year-old man, and he has his live stream video rolling, and it's going live on multiple social media platforms. And these guys are exposed, which is Musa's term, as predators. And they end up on the internet, on YouTube, and he tags the local community where he made his catch. And then a lot of times his viewers, which number in the thousands, tens of thousands, will identify these people, and some of them have been high-profile people in these communities. And he's spreading out the hunt far beyond North Central PA. He's down in Harrisburg now, and York, and other places in our more immediate PennLive coverage area. And that's why we decided to tag along on some of his predator hunts.
Now, you and I met for the first time in person a few weeks ago, and one of the first things that we discussed was this idea of the sofa or armchair detective, you know, these people who primarily investigate, most popularly murders online from the safety of their homes. They're just civilians. They get into cases like the Idaho killer cases. But one of the things that we brought up was a lot of the times these guys are wrong and they target the completely incorrect individual and most often than not ruin their lives, if not for a few months, then for a long time. I don't know if you saw recently in Philadelphia, there were those women that were incorrectly accused of racism because there was a viral video that circulated online and the Inquirer.
I saw that at a restaurant, and they were... To me, for that to happen is kind of crazy. I totally agree with you.
But how does what Musa does differentiate from them, especially when, what these people are doing are absolutely detestable, but how do you draw the line between justified vigilantism and what those people are trying to do?
Well, Musa we systematically went out with him on a night's worth of hunting throughout Cumberland and Dauphin counties. And the first thing in observing Musa and sort of getting his play-by-play of what he's doing, he targets nobody. Okay, so he creates an account on Grindr, which is sort of a gay dating. They call it a dating app, but it's more of a hookup app.
Yeah,
it kind of shows everybody who's within a certain geographical area who's on at any given moment. And technically, all of those people who are on are available for a hookup, just because of the proximity of being there.
It is very creepy. So, a couple of my guy friends used to use that in college, and you can see when they get closer and closer. It's like the exact mileage, yeah.
Yeah, so what he does is he creates this persona, and his name was First Time the night we were out with him, and his little description was younger looking for older. And this is like putting a flag up, and it's showing that he's right in this vicinity where all these other men looking for a hookup are. So naturally, some of them just start chatting with him. You know what I mean? These chats very quickly turn sexual. There's often exchanges of photographs of genitalia and everything else. Musa, because he's in his 40s, he's a young-looking dude, but he couldn't pass for a 15-year-old. So he doesn't put a picture up of himself. And if somebody asks for a picture, he'll say, well, I'm on the down low. You know what I mean? But he has some supposedly fake pictures of male genitalia that he does send off, you know what I mean? And they'll exchange back and forth, and then they'll start chatting, and a lot of them want to meet up. And that's usually when he drops the line, well, if you don't mind age, I'm 15, I don't mind, you want to meet up. And that's the point where once the person is notified that he's a 15-year-old kid who's sort of faking his age on this adult app, if the person wants to go further, that's when he says they're a predator. You know what I mean? So anything after that, he starts screenshotting all the chat, so as sort of the evidence. And he'll show that he identified himself as a 15-year-old boy. They don't mind age. They want to meet up. Because there's the GPS online, he'll have them text him the exact address. So he even has them texting the exact address. And then obviously when the meetup happens, it's him at the front door when they open it, or if it's one of these drive up where they drive up and are going to pick him up for sort of a backseat action, so to speak. He'll be right there and he'll get into the car and have the video going. And basically his first question is, why did you want to meet up with a 15-year-old boy? And of course, there's every excuse in the book. But he says, no, that was me the whole time. I have your whole chat here. And he says, so what were you up to? And it goes on from there. And it's all content that's going right out live.
How do you feel about him live streaming it? Do you think that it kind of adds to, how would I word this? It's very much almost like a public flogging of these guys, right? Which once again, they're doing the wrong thing. They're pedophiles. To be biased, I do think they deserve what they're getting. But then you ask DAs around the area like Fran Chardo that, how do they feel about it? And that they say essentially that Musa should stick to following the rules. How do you feel about such a public unveiling of these guys?
It's basically the only tool he has. Okay, he can't do a citizen's arrest. I guess he could, according to Fran Chardo, once he has identified somebody who wants to meet up with a 15-year-old, he could let them know about it and let the law enforcement handle it from there. But there's this genre of these citizen predator hunters, and their only tool is this exposure, via social media. And they put it out there, and then they're saying they're serving the community by letting people in the community know that this person is out there. He doesn't know who it is. They don't give their real names or anything. They might give their address, but he'll tag the community where this happens, and then his viewers will go online and say, oh, that's my dentist, or hey, that guy teaches, at one of the public schools, or You know what I mean? Or this guy was an ex-cop who ran for city council. That's how it happens. The identification is made through his videos. In fairness to Fran Chardo, he said he did investigate when Musa was down here previous to when we met up with him, and he was doing some hunting. And Fran had one of his assistant DAs look into the case Musa brought him, and he said that there were some questions and qualms with it, that they didn't feel they could go forward with it. But other jurisdictions are, and they are charging, and they are getting guilty pleas on some of these cases. And in one of them, I got 5+ years in state prison. And normally one of the charges they plead to is strong enough to get these people to then have a 25-year requirement to list on Megan's Law, like the predator list, the sex offender list. So there are real consequences, and there are some real cases coming out of what he's doing.
Why do you think someone would want to get into this kind of line of work to begin with? Do you think it has something to do perhaps with a lack of faith rather in the system? Because violence is at an all-time high currently. Crime is through the roof. People seem to be really disenchanted with politics on either side of the political spectrum. Do you think that this maybe stems from that? Or do you think maybe it's more so the fact that social media has given people the tools to do this?
Well, definitely social media has given people the tools. And Musa started this during the pandemic, when the isolation of the pandemic forced a lot of people who wanted to meet anyone onto these apps. And that included a good number of predators. And law enforcement confirms that. Both Chardo and the law enforcement up in Luzerne County says there's a lot of these guys out there, more than you or I would believe. And Musa, who's been doing this only on weekends for 3 years, has 500 and plus catches.
Oh, wow. That many? Jesus.
Yes.
Here I was thinking it was a good thing that most people say no when you mentioned that in the beginning, but that's a disheartening number.
There's a good number that still say yes.
Ew.
You know what I mean? Even though the vast majority say no. So there's definitely whoever you talk to, whether it's law enforcement who are working on this or whether it's Musa who's been out there mixing it up, with these apps, there's a lot of people who would cross that line, that taboo line. And here's the other thing, too. Musa is a really interesting guy. I mean, he grew up in Newark, New Jersey, dirt poor, parents who probably weren't the best parents. The only thing that got respect in his neighborhood were the drug dealers, the street level drug dealers that had a little bit of bling. And he sort of got caught up in that life. And it's one of those things where, when you're younger, you get caught up in the system. It just leads to more system. And it's been a revolving door for him for decades. And along the way, when he was out, he had 4 children. His oldest now, I think, is in her 20s, but he has the youngest is 6. And at some point, after missing years-long gaps of his first 3 daughters' lives, he finally drew the line saying, I'm just not a good drug dealer. I need to get out of this. He did have a felony conviction for aggravated assault on a police officer. Now, to hear him tell it versus the official narrative, it's 2 different stories. It still was a 50 months in jail, the last straw for him. And he got some culinary skills that when he got out, he was working at a country club and worked his way up to sous chef. But when COVID hit and everything shut down, he was on YouTube and stumbled onto this genre of predator hunter. And within that same weekend, had a catch. And he's been going full steam ever since. And the respect that he says he gets out of it, he gets plenty of criticism and he gets plenty of threats. And but the respect from the people, and the appreciation, that's what drives him.
Now, true crime and the large popularity it's amassed throughout the years seems to be a very good way of getting the pulse of what people are most concerned with about these days. Personally, I think kind of like horror, in the 80s and 70s, a lot of horror movies were about the satanic panic. In the 60s, it was fear of communism, things like that. And it seems like the current trend in a lot of true crime documentaries these days, or even just the news in general, has to deal with pedophilia. Why do you think there's such an upheaval almost, or rather an increased interest in catching these guys?
That's a great question. And I mean, I know Luzerne County is kind of a blue collar county. They lost a lot of their factories and they lost a lot of their good jobs and, they lost a lot of their dignity. They had the opioid crisis up there. So they lost a lot of family and friends to that. But, the one thing they have left to protect is their children, and then you get into these sort of political circles, and that QAnon or whatever that was, where it was talking about conspiracy theories about politicians who were pedophiles. And then you have the Epstein case where he supposedly commits suicide, and then his female paramour, they kept the lid on her address book that was supposed to be filled with all these who's of names in this global pedophilia ring. I mean, there's a lot of smoke. I'm sure there's a lot of fire too, but
Absolutely.
There's this sort of mythology that it's being also protected by the power structure, because the appetite for it is one of these sort of elite appetites of the rich and famous and politically connected, that's like the last taboo to be broken, and that some of the people who have the power to break it are the people at the top. You know what I mean? So I think it all feeds into it. But regardless of all that, how much is conspiracy, how much is fact, we don't know. But the one thing that is a fact is there are a lot of predators who are, especially now, a lot on these apps, who would take the opportunity to do that if they had the chance. As one predator told Musa, it just was easy. It was, he asked why he did it. It was easy. It was easy. I could have the kid come right to my house from this app. You know what I mean? And that kid was Musa, luckily.
Luckily, because there was one predator. He said that he raped, the youngest he went was a 3-year-old girl, right? Which
that was another one of his chilling ones where because the one thing about Musa, he's very well spoken. He's a showman for sure, especially you said, well, why does he do it live stream? Well, part of the reason is I think, it kind of protects him. It puts them sort of on their back heel, but it also sort of brings his audience into the moment. And he's, I guess, taking little comments from them. They can write in their comments as they go, and he's answering them as they go. It's that sense of being there, seeing what's going to happen next. You know what I mean? Who's going to be behind door number 3, so to speak. So he does an interesting job. I'll say that, having spent the night and watching him, even in between hunts, or even when a hunt doesn't actually lead up to an exposure. He keeps the audience pretty well engaged, I will say that.
It's almost like a modern version of the stalks. You're publicly humiliating these guys on a mass scale. And the internet, nothing really goes away on the internet, right? So it seems to be a surefire way almost of shaming these guys who can hide behind a computer screen and won't feel any sort of guilt until someone like Musa comes and makes them cry, which a few of them have done on video.
Exactly.
And not because of what they did, like you point out, but because of they got caught.
Exactly. And that whole thing of the exposure, one of his followers apparently got him into the Urban Dictionary. Musaphile is to be suddenly exposed as in a child predator. So he, that was the sort of feather in his cap, to sort of have that justification. And he's certainly prolific about it. And having been with him and creeping around some of these, he's invited to these homes, but he has to sort of, if he's going there himself, a 15-year-old can't drive, so he has to sort of park in some dark, remote area, then walk up to the porch. And, you never know what's going to be behind that door. And, of course, a true pedophile is used to preying upon somebody who's weak. So they are taken aback when it's Musa who's there when the door opens. So he always has the advantage of surprise. But I don't know that I'd want to be doing this, and certainly not every weekend, where he's off on his own, and for a lot of times Friday night, Saturday night, real late, maybe even getting back Sunday morning, back up to the house. So
not even for the chance to have your name used as internet slang?
Not even for that, no. But I'll tell you, it was an eye-opening experience being along for the ride, and I really think it makes for some compelling reading in the series that we have, where we really just do, instead of telling, we're showing exactly what's going on and what the conversations are back and forth, and what it's like to go up to some house thinking that a predator is there. You're in the middle of, sedate suburbia, but there's this eerie feeling or this kind of suspense that something's amiss, because, hey, if a predator is there, predator is everywhere. If he's in this, Carlisle suburb that seems like so manicured, it's quiet, you know what I mean, and safe. But if a predator is there, a predator is anywhere, that it's disquieting.
Makes you kind of paranoid.
It did. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It makes you paranoid for sure. And, certainly parents reading this, seeing this, I think they'll be more concerned about tracking their younger kids' use of the phone and where they're at and, what they're on and what apps they're using. That could be a good thing.
Is that even possible? I feel like the internet is just so open and spacious, and it's really hard to control. I mean, how do you even really track anything and block your kids from stuff?
That somebody else above my pay grade is going to need to do that, because I have no idea. Because Musa's using some of these apps I had never even heard of that he's using. So, I mean, it just keeps, like you said, progressing and multiplying. So
you're better off not knowing about them, John.
Right.
Speaking of apps and social media, one of the biggest points you brought up towards the third part of your story is that social media is actually one of the biggest deterrents, more so than the law, in Musa's investigation. How YouTube blocks him and...
Yeah, I mean, the content that he's producing, especially because he has been putting it up unedited. So he'll do the live stream and then he'll take a recording of that and then make a permanent post out of it. So it is raw, unedited content. It is, in a way you could call it cyberbullying, because when he does confront a predator, he's confrontational. He's demanding why they wanted to meet up with a 15-year-old boy. A lot of times he's saying, you need to confess. You need to call, your wife or your mother. You need to confess to somebody about what you're doing, and you need to get help. And sometimes he was, this might be the showman in him, or maybe he got the suggestion from one of his online viewers, but he said, well, make the guy do push-ups, or make the guy slap himself if he thinks he did something wrong. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So, and certainly anybody who gets outed by him or exposed by him wants that content off of their ASAP. So I'm sure between the complaints that you can get and register your complaints and the community guidelines that cover a lot of this thing, there's a lot of profanity, a lot of, sexual innuendo. Some of his videos, and yes, his YouTube channel has been pulled several times. But again, he plays his own version of whack-a-mole, because every time anything gets banned, he pops up under a slightly different title, and reopens a new YouTube page and starts it all over again. So he's determined to keep going. But yeah, certainly some of his content it's been tougher for him to keep it up there sometimes. But right now, the content is winning in terms of the results that he's gotten, in terms of from his audience participating in actually identifying the people who are in the video, some of them important. And, sometimes he says two of the people that he identified, or were later identified by the audience, committed suicide, and he said he has no sympathy for them. It makes him wonder how many other skeletons that weren't exposed were in their closets.
Thanks again, John, for joining us, and be sure to check out all 3 parts of his series exclusively found on PennLive.com. This podcast is brought to you by Renewal by Andersen of Central Pennsylvania. Spend less to heat and cool your home now through March 31st with the area's top full-service window service by saving $300 on every window and $800 on every door. You can even get a free upgrade to Smart Sun Glass without having to pay anything for 2 years. Take advantage of this deal and schedule yourself a free inspection by heading over to RBACentralPADeals.com. That's RBACentralPADeals.com, or by calling 717-836-1080.